Today at the National Press Club, author, athlete, mining engineer and motivational speaker Turia Pitt. She survived severe burns against the odds and will today share her thoughts on the power of vulnerability. Turia Pitt with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's National Press Club Westpac address. My name is Emma MacDonald and I am the convener of Women in Media Canberra and I'm the associate editor of Her Canberra. Turia Pitt is many things: an engineer, a mother, an ultramarathon runner, a speaker, a best-selling author and award winner. She's going to share a little of her incredible story with us today. If you are following the conversation online, please use the handle @PressClubAust or the hashtag NPC. It's my great pleasure to welcome Turia Pitt to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. This is feeling a bit bloody bigger than Ben-Hur at the moment. All right, first things first, get the speech up. So, before I, formally start, obviously my name is Turia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, the Ngunnawal people, and I'd also like to thank the National Press Club and Women in Media for this amazing opportunity to speak with all of you today. And finally, a big thanks to you, the audience, for showing up here today. It really means a lot to me that there's people in the seats right now. So I'll take you back 10 years ago. I was working as a mining engineer in the Kimberleys at a diamond mine, and at that time I had my career path all mapped out. I would be a graduate mining engineer, superintendent. I probably would have done a couple of international secondments, and I had my sights set on one day being the CEO of a global mining firm. That never happened. Because I entered an ultramarathon, I was trapped by a grassfire during the race. I received burns to 65% of my body. I spent 6 months in hospital and I was told that I would never run again. So what did I do? Well, I reinvented myself. I rewrote my story. Not as a motivational speaker, because us engineers are way more credible than that. But as an athlete, an author, an adventurer. I've done Ironman World Championships. I've run up mountains. I've run through valleys and through gorges. But let's not get into all of that just yet. Instead, I wanted to take you back to 2011. It was a month after the fire. I'd just come out of my induced coma. I was still burnt raw, and at that time it was excruciating for me even to make the slightest movement. Even just breathing to me felt like a layer of my skin was being peeled away. Despite all of this pain, my doctors believed it was really important to get me moving as soon as possible, otherwise I would just stiffen up completely. And so one morning a man came into my room, and he was short, he was bald, and he had a thick gold chain around his neck. So I thought he was a gangster. But he said to me, "Good morning, Turia. My name is Frank. I'm your physiotherapist, and I'm here to teach you how to stand again." And so I said, "Good morning, Frank. No thanks, mate. Not interested, not today." Now, Frank could have had an equally great career as a telemarketer. He wouldn't take no for an answer. And in one swift movement, he had proceeded over to the side of my hospital bed, and he jerked me upright and he swung my legs over the side. And I just started screaming and shouting. It felt like he had pulled my already fractured skin apart even more. And so I was sobbing and crying and in complete agony, and he just grabbed me by my shoulders, got down into my grill and said, "Now we're going to stand." And then he just pulled me up onto my own 2 shaky feet. And I just remember sobbing and crying all over his neck into his gold chain. I always get asked, "Turia, what was the hardest point of your whole journey?" And I think that was it. And it wasn't because of the pain, it was because the enormity of this task ahead of me just hit me in the face, because I couldn't even stand up by myself. So how the hell was I going to be able to walk again, run again, compete again, go back to work, have a family? And so I realised really early on in my journey that I couldn't spend too much energy thinking about what the future might look like or what the end game was, but instead what I could do would just literally focus on taking my journey one step at a time. Now, after months of being in that hospital, I graduated from taking steps to doing the stairs. And the first time I did the stairs, I did one step. That was all I had in me. And when I went back to my room that night, I really felt as if I had achieved something worthwhile. Day 2, I did 2 steps. By the end of the week, guess how many I was doing? No, 2. They were harder than they looked, okay? Eventually, though, I was able to do a whole flight of stairs. Yes, winner, yes. And I told my surgeon, after I mastered this feat of, extraordinary human endurance, and I kind of expected my surgeon to be proud of me, to give me a pat on the back or something, but he just said, you only did one of them, one flight of stairs. Well, that'd be right. Of course, you're not strong enough to do all of them. Now, my surgeon's a good guy. He just knew how to press my buttons. He knows that I wasn't someone who likes to be told no. And so, in reality, he did me a favour. He threw down a challenge for me. I wanted to prove him wrong. That was my initial motivation. Is anyone else like that? Does anyone else here like proving people wrong? Okay, good. So I'm not the only psychopath in the room. Now, it's one thing to be motivated initially. It's another thing entirely to put in the work consistently. But that's what I did. I did the stairs every single day. Does that mean I got better at them every day? No. Improvement's not always linear. But what did I do? I was consistent. I applied myself and I just kept showing up. And eventually, after 6 months in that hospital, I was able to start from the very bottom and climb every single one of those 234 stairs up to the burns unit at the top. Now, everyone in this room, you're all presumably high achievers, so you would already know this. It's consistency that drives results. Does anyone here know what an Ironman is? A couple of tentative hands in the room went up. So an Ironman, it's really regarded as the epitome of endurance events. So it starts with a 4-kilometre swim. That's like swimming 4 laps up and back like Burley Griffin. A 180-kilometre bike ride, like riding from Canberra to Mollymook on the south coast where I live. And a 42-kilometre run, like doing the Canberra Marathon. You've got to do all 3 of these things consecutively. And I did my first ever Ironman in Port Macquarie, and the start of the day was a bit of an anticlimax. Because when you think of a huge athletic event like Ironman, I don't know, you imagine like the gun firing and then just people like tearing off into the water. So this day was nothing like that. There was a little beep, then people calmly proceeded to enter the water. Every 10 seconds or so there would be another beep, and then another lot of people would go in. And because I was all the way at the back, I had to wait 30 minutes to even start my day. And 30 minutes is actually a really long time, especially when you're feeling a bit like a lamb to the slaughter. Now, can we all relate to this in this room? Who thinks that waiting to start is often the worst part of the process before you're about to give a presentation at work or ask your boss for a raise or you're about to do a pregnancy test? You get into this really nervous, really anxious state of mind. It's almost like your mind starts to play tricks on you. And that was me in the morning of Ironman. I was thinking things like, I don't know if I could do this, Dave. I don't know if I can do this race. I don't know why I didn't listen to my doctors when they said it wasn't a good idea. I don't know why I've told every single person in Australia that I'm doing this stupid Ironman. And right up until the moment where I entered the water, I was still in such a negative frame of mind. But as soon as I actually started, it was almost like everything inside me suddenly changed. All of my excuses. I don't have on my fingers. I can't regulate my body temperature. I find it hard to get in enough oxygen. All of my excuses and my fears, they suddenly became my biggest motivators. And 500 metres into the swim, I thought, yep, Turia, you've got this. This is a good pace. You've only got 14 hours to go. I ended up crossing that finishing line in 13 and a half hours. Yes, that was faster than Tony Abbott. coming down that finishing chute, surrounded by hundreds of spectators, crossing that finishing line and knowing that all of the sweat and tears and hours of training, all of that showing up every single day, all of it culminated in this absolute moment of triumph. So I'd done one Ironman, amazing. And then I got invited to do the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii. And part of that invitation was to be in an NBC documentary about the race and about myself. So I said yes, yes to both. Now I'm not going to go into details about the Ironman Hawaii because I feel like you've endured enough talk about triathlon already. So I'll take you straight to New York. I'd flown over to go to the premiere of this NBC doco. And on the night of the event, all gussied up for the party, I walked out of my hotel and across to the subway. And as I walked down those dark and dank subway steps, I opened my purse and I realised that I had forgotten my EFTPOS card in the room. I just had $20 in cash. Now, maybe for you, if you'd forgotten your EFTPOS card but you had $20 in cash, you might think, oh, no worries, that's not a problem. But I immediately started to feel nervous because my damaged hands, they make it really hard for me to hold coins. And so I always feel exceptionally awkward, fumbling with change when it's handed to me. So I just avoid it at all costs, literally. But I was running late and I didn't really have any other option except to pay cash for my ticket. So I line up in the queue. And in the queue I can hear the ticket seller and he sounds like an asshole. He's yelling at people for being in the wrong place, for having the wrong money, for being in the wrong queue. And I'm just getting more and more nervous because, I know that I'm going to have to have this interaction with him. And so I come up with an idea. After I get my subway ticket, I'll just leave. I won't worry about getting my change. And so when I'm at the front of the queue, I politely ask him for a pass to Midtown, and of course he yells at me. And, I just smile because I know I've got a plan. And I give him the $20 note, he gives me the subway pass and starts to count out the change. And it's at that point that I just leave because, like I said, don't want to extend this transaction any more than I need to. But then he just starts screaming at me. He says, come and get your goddamn change. Come back here now, I don't want your goddamn change clogging up my desk. Busy subway station in the middle of New York, people are staring at me. And so I walk back and I say, oh, I'm really sorry, mate, but I can't actually pick up the change. I'm really sorry, but can you just keep it? And that just sets him off again. He says, I don't want your goddamn change, I don't want it, I'm sick of you goddamn people treating me like this. And I just feel so flustered, so stressed, so ridiculed by this one interaction that I burst into tears. The middle of New York, the middle of a subway surrounded by hundreds of strangers, I stop where I am and I start to cry because I was travelling to the NBC premiere of the Ironman World Champions event that I had competed in, and in that moment it felt like all of my work up until that point had been futile because I couldn't do this simple, ordinary task of just taking my change for the subway ticket. It's really easy for us to own the big moments in our story, the glorious moments, the moments which are immortalised in the news or in the media or by getting a shiny new award, but it's harder for us to own the small moments, the small, invisible moments, the days where you feel like a failure when you forget to take your kids to swimming or you miss a deadline at work, or the days when you look in the mirror and guess what, you just don't like what you see. But I believe that owning yourself, owning your story, that means you have to own the good parts and the bad. So I live in Mollymook on the south coast of New South Wales, and as everyone here probably knows, in 2019 we had a really hectic fire season. There was no power, no water, there were embers falling into my backyard, my town was encircled by flames, there was a thick, heavy smoke in the air. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, I had my 2-year-old son at home with me, and of course, during this time, I wasn't out fighting any fires, I wasn't organising any food drops, I wasn't out jumping in a boat to help rescue residents from nearby towns. I was, to be frank with you guys, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I had reoccurring nightmares about running through flames with my toddler in my arms. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I was putting all of my energy into just keeping a lid on my panic genie, because once that genie's out of the bottle, you've got zero chance of squashing it back in. And so I did what I always do in times of uncertainty or fear or stress or anxiety. I started writing. I wrote about the sheer terror I felt and the fear that raced through me whenever I heard that someone was staying back to defend their properties. They don't know, I wrote. They don't know that a fire sounds like 1,000 road trains coming towards you. They don't know that the smoke will feel like it's invading every single one of your pores. They don't know that it will be so hot that you will watch your skin bubble before your eyes. The thing about writing is sometimes you'll read it back to yourself and you want to self-censor because you think that's too vulnerable, that's too much of me, that's too embarrassing. They're my most private feelings and my most personal thoughts. And so what I have always tried to do with my story is to share it. As uncomfortable as it is, as flawed and as imperfect as I know it makes me seem, I know that there's power, there's real power when we share our stories. So a colleague came over, she's here today, Grace. Say hello. Grace read what I wrote. We sat down at my kitchen table. We felt utterly useless, but we also felt like we wanted to do something to give back. So we both loved the Buy from the Bush campaign. Has everyone heard of Buy from the Bush? Yep, okay, cool. And Grace suggested that we do something like that. And this confused me. I was like, what? Do you want us to just jump on their Instagram page or something? And Grace said, no, we create a platform that supports small businesses from fire-affected communities. I was still confused. I said, you've lost me, mate. Just start from the top, start again. And then she laid it all out for me. We started an Instagram page, and then, for example, we profile a homeware store in Milton. Then anyone in Australia or even all over the world could find out about that homeware store. They could buy something from that store. They could support that local economy. They could boost town morale, and they could do all of those things at the same time. Done. Amazing idea, let's do it. Now we needed a name. Let's just call it Spend With Them. We needed a logo. Let's just do one up quickly in Canva. And then we posted what I'd written, and within an hour, we had over 10,000 followers. Grace was fielding phone calls from TV stations and journalists. Hundreds of businesses were contacting us to be profiled. And I was still trying to work out how to switch from my personal page to the Spend With Them page. Within a couple of days, we had 200,000 followers. Grace and I were averaging 3 hours of sleep a night. I was literally going to give birth at any day. The whole thing was, quite hectic, and Spend With Them very quickly took on a life of its own. And the stories that were shared, they were beautiful, they were heartbreaking, they were life-affirming. There was a woman in the Blue Mountains who grew and sold tea at her local markets. She was trapped in her town with no power, no water, no food for 5 days. She was profiled by Spend With Them and made up her monthly income after just one post. A farmer who made goat's milk soap received thousands of orders. A coffee roaster had to put on additional staff to help them to pack their orders. The Spend With Them campaign was an awesome experience. It obviously financially supported a lot of Australian small businesses, but also it was a way for people to share their stories. And like I said, stories, they're powerful. I deeply believe that. A couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with this guy, and I'm not going to name names because this is Press Club, not Vegas. What I say here definitely won't stay here. And look, this guy that was interviewing me, he was a dick. He was. He asked me questions like what it was like to have people stare at me, how I could possibly come to terms with my changed appearance, how my partner could still find me attractive. And then he questioned me as to why I'd been on so many of my book covers. And he justified this line of interrogation by saying, I've written 3 books and I've never been on the cover of any of them. And so I said to him, well, mate, no one knows who you are. So obviously putting you on the cover would not be a selling point. I'm not sure if that answer ever satisfied him. Now, the Australian Women's Weekly first put me on their cover 7 years ago, and what a bloody ruckus that caused. I received hundreds of emails from CNN, BBC, People Magazine, the New York Times. I received calls from journalists in Singapore and India and Israel and Canada, and they all wanted to write this story of what this bold move by an Australian magazine editor meant for the industry's perceptions of beauty. I've been on a few covers since then, and I'm proud of that. I think it's awesome. It's cool that someone who looks like me can be on the cover of a national magazine. It's a reflection of the fact that, surprise, surprise, we all come in different shapes and sizes and colours and packages, not to mention ages and backgrounds and abilities and religions and sexual orientation and gender identities. But I'm also just getting tired because it's 2021 and diversity still seems to be an afterthought. Now, my home, it's a beautiful home, beautiful house, but it's not necessarily well cared for. I've got 2 young kids, so it's not uncommon to find Vegemite crusts wedged into the sofa cushions or find a half-eaten lamb chop in the bathroom. So when I found out one day that I was going to do a photo shoot at my house, I was of course excited, but also stressed because, like I said, lovely house, not cared for very well. And so the morning of the photo shoot, I was in a peak state, barking out orders left, right and centre. Michael, get the cobwebs down from the top corner of the sink. Kids, pick up every single piece of your Lego. I don't want to see any of it. Like a complete maniac, I was rushing around the house, trying desperately to get it in shipshape. And then I had a thought. I hadn't checked outside. So I strode out onto the balcony to do my official survey of the front garden and the driveway. And I didn't like what I saw. Because it looked to me as if the garden and the driveway were covered in hundreds and hundreds of chocolate licorice bullets. So I raced down the stairs to do a more thorough investigation. I opened the door, took a few steps, and then discovered what I thought was chocolate licorice bullets was in fact, on closer inspection, dead cockroaches. Hundreds of them. It felt like I was in a nightmare, and so I just started screaming. And Michael, my partner, ran down the stairs and he said, darling, what's wrong? And I said, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why this has happened. There's been a plague of cockroaches and the photo shoot people are going to arrive at any second. I don't know what's going on. And Michael said, you've been nagging me for weeks to get the exterminator around. And I finally did it. Cool, hey? And it was at that precise moment 3 cars containing a hair and makeup artist, a stylist, 2 photography assistants, 1 photographer and a journalist pulled into our driveway. So yes, Michael, he did call the exterminator. But the mental load of getting to that point fell on me, as I think it would fall on most of the women here in this room. A mum of 2 little boys, love them to bits, but honestly it was a logistical nightmare for me to get here today. It involved cumbersome spreadsheets, multiple calls between family members and daycare, and an emergency call last night asking where I kept the spare toy giraffe because the original giraffe was lost somewhere in the wilderness. That was very much likely my living room. Now, I love being a mum. It is an amazing job, but like all great careers, it has its challenges. I breastfed both of my kids. That was important for me, but I found it really hard with my first son, so the midwives at the hospital suggested I try Nipple Shields. Now these are, if you will imagine, a cute little silicone sombrero for your nipple. So every time I'd go to feed my son, I'd attach my little silicone sombrero and I'd get to work. Although breastfeeding is not really counted as work at all. It doesn't count towards GDP in Australia, even though it is time consuming. Believe me, I put in more than 40 hours a week when I was breastfeeding. Running a household doesn't count either. Buying food at Woolies, taking the kids to swimming, making dinner, doing laundry, reading the very hungry caterpillar 15 times, dropping the kids off at childcare. Childcare, it's essential for families unless someone, usually mum, takes one for the team and bows out. Now, all of my girlfriends at home, they all work part-time because childcare, it is expensive and it just doesn't make economic sense for them to keep working. I know we all say that being a mum is the most important job in the world, but to me, that just feels like a platitude because mums produce the future tax-paying citizens of this nation, but I just can't see how it's rewarded, prioritised, or even recognised. So I'm a mum, but I've also got another job, and this is probably going to make me sound like a wanker, but I'm in the business of inspiring people. And I inspire people because I'm someone who's done the impossible. I've died 3 times on the operating table. I've painfully rebuilt my body and my life, and I've gone on to have some really great experiences. It's been close to 10 years since I was caught in that fire, and I'm still out here sharing my story because, like I've said, I really believe, I firmly believe that there is power when we share our stories. You've just got to look at what's happened this year. I feel bolstered by the bravery of women like Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins and Kate Sullivan. I feel empowered by their vulnerability, and I feel enraged on their behalf. Now, I love this country. Genuinely, I do. I migrated here when I was a baby, and I'm proud to call this sunburnt country my home, but it's hard for me to reconcile my love for this country with the fact that women are not equal here. And we all know the stats. We know that a woman dies every week at the hands of a partner. We know that the fastest growing group of homeless people in Australia is older women. And I don't have the solutions to this. I'm not a policy maker or a lawmaker. I'm a storyteller. And so I believe that the more people that share their stories, the more people who speak up, take a stand, who don't take no for an answer, the closer we'll get to a solution. Now, I've just got one more story I want to share with you guys. I grew up with Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within blaring out of the audio speakers of our 1987 Tarago RV because my dad, massive Tony fan. So when Tony was in town years ago, my dad bought me tickets to go and see him, and I don't know, maybe he thought I needed some motivational speaking tips. It was crazy. 5,000 people jumping up and down going nuts over this Tony guy. And the very first day, the very first hour, Tony announced that all of us were going to be attempting to firewalk. Now, I don't know if you guys know what firewalking is, so I'll explain it for you. Basically, they get a pit of burning hot coals at around 500 degrees Celsius, and the aim of the game is to walk bravely across without hurting yourself. Most people would find this a little bit scary. Being burnt to 65% of my body, I was shitting myself, and I thought, you know what? Didn't sign up for this. So I got out of my seat, headed straight for the nearest exit. But there was one of Tony's team guarding the door. And the guy goes to me, hey, Tony knows who you are. Tony wants you to do the firewalk. And so I said, oh yeah? Well, you can tell your mate Tony to get fucked. I'm not doing it. And as I stood there in this Mexican standoff with this guy, I started to think about it a little more carefully, and I thought, maybe with each step I take over those burning hot coals, I'll be walking further away from my biggest tragedy and closer towards my biggest triumph. And I gotta say, standing there on the edge of the hot coals, I was petrified. Every single fibre of me was just screaming to run in the opposite direction. But I found it within me to take the first step, and yes, I was elated. But here's the thing with hot coals. You can't just take one step. It's a little bit like life. One step is great, it's amazing, it gets us started, but we have to be able to keep on walking forward. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Turia. What a privilege it is for the Press Club to hear your story and to share it with the country. So well done. I will take the first question before we hand over to the working press. You mentioned your work with Grace on the Spend With Them campaign. Coming from Mollymook, can you tell us what bushfire recovery looks like on the ground now? There was a lot of publicity, you know, how far have we come? Do we need to still be assisting those fire-affected communities? What's it like living there now?
I think the town has made a tremendous recovery, as have a lot of towns around the country. But you've got to remember as well that pretty much after that bushfire season, COVID happened, and so everyone's focus went from bushfire recovery to navigating the pandemic, which of course also had an impact on Australian businesses around the country. So I think whether it's because you want to support them because of the fires or whether you want to support them because of the pandemic, I would just encourage everyone to get out there and support as many Australian small businesses as you can, because there's real people and real stories behind those businesses.
Yeah. Okay, our next question is from The Australian.
Hi, Adeshla Ore from The Australian. Thank you so much for your speech today. We've seen a series of females this year come forward and talk both with courage and vulnerability about their treatment in politics. How do you think our current political system can continue to foster this vulnerability so that this isn't just a brief moment but can actually create sustained change?
Yeah, that's a good question, and to be honest to you, I don't really have a firm answer on that. Like I said, I'm a storyteller, and so I think the more women who are brave enough to be vulnerable, the more women who feel empowered, like women like Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame, and come forward with their stories, I feel like that will help change happen.
The next question is from AAP.
Thank you so much for your speech. You've touched on this when you spoke about the need to own your invisible or your bad moments, but can you give us an insight into what you do and how you cope when the microphone's not on, the camera's not on, the media spotlight's gone, and you're perhaps feeling a bit spent from all of the public work that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I am a normal person, as you know, as you might have guessed from the speech. And so if I'm having a bad day or a bad moment, much like anyone in this room, I think it's really important to acknowledge it. A lot of the times we try and put a positive spin on things and we try and almost bullshit our way through the situation, but I actually think just owning it and saying, you know what, today's crap, today's been a bad day, that's okay. I think the more we accept it and allow it to come in, the faster it dissipates as well. So first of all, accepting and acknowledging it. And the second thing, which I didn't mention in my keynote, is I had a psychologist who I still see today, and I really encourage people, if they're going through a hard time, to go and see support. Family and friends are great. They're not trained experts. And I think if our car's broken, we take it to a mechanic. If we want to get our eyebrows waxed, hopefully we would go to a beautician. And so I really believe our heart and head deserve no less than the very best professional help that we can get. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
The next question is from the West Australian.
Lani Scarr from the West Australian. I'm also on the Women in Media board. Thank you so much for your speech. You're an absolutely remarkable person. One of the key topics throughout your speech, I felt, was really about your level of resilience to all the different challenges you've faced. We know that people's mental health, particularly at the moment, mental health challenges have increased throughout the pandemic. So how would you say you have remained as resilient as you have, I guess broadening on the last question? And then secondly, you worked in the mining sector. You've spoken about wanting to have women and equality for women. Do you think the mining sector needs to promote more women in order to help facilitate that?
Yeah, so sorry, can you just say the first question again?
About mental health and resilience, what would be your main thing that helps you be so resilient?
I think lowering the expectations of yourself, not berating yourself if you've had a bad day or a bad week or a bad month or a bad year, and seeing a professional, seeing a psychologist or a counsellor, someone who understands mental health and can help you work through it appropriately. That would be my advice there. And the second question, do I think the mining industry should do more to promote women? Yes, of course, because I feel the more women that are within an industry, the more equal it is. And I think the mining industry in particular is very male dominated, and I think that's a real issue for them.
Thank you.
Turia, you've declared that you're not a policymaker, you're a storyteller, and you do that remarkably well. Apart from providing better funding for childcare, which is just a start, if you were Prime Minister for one day, what would be rammed through Parliament in that 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very exciting thought. Drunk with power up here. No, I really feel like childcare should be treated like education, and it should be free. It should be an option for everyone to take up. I think it's, if we want more women in the workforce, you have to provide childcare, then they can re-enter. I'm really lucky, I've got family, I've got my other son's old enough to be in childcare, but my mum has a baby today. But again, that's invisible work, that's not counted, right? That's not counting towards GDP. My mum looking after both of my children today so that I can come here and speak with you guys. So I think the main thing that I'd want to see is that kind of invisible work be counted somewhere, not necessarily towards GDP, I'm not an economist, but somewhere it should be counted. And the second thing would be free childcare, because if you want more women to be in the workforce and to remain in the workforce, and if you want a more diverse workforce, and it's women who are usually leaving their careers or putting pause on their careers to take time out to have their children, then you need to give them another option, which is childcare.
Do you think workplaces could do a little bit more to make it more flexible, encouraged, and a positive thing for male workers to be more flexible and take up some of the load? Because we're still in traditional.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that paternity leave isn't a legal requirement almost acts as a disincentive for guys to take paternity leave. I know anecdotally a lot of mates who wanted to take paternity leave, it was their child too, they wanted to be around, but they didn't want to get called a wuss at the office or get asked, how's your holiday been, mate? Have you just been bludging? So I think definitely it should be a legal requirement to have paternity leave as well.
Yeah. Our next question is from the Canberra Times.
Thank you so much for such warm, incredibly powerful stories. I had a question about that when I walked up, but what you've just talked about is far more intrinsic to the importance of Australia today. It's a vision of a changed relationship between men and women. How is it that we actually make that relationship come into action? How on earth can we actually empower women so that they feel, and not just women, but people with disability as well, so that they feel capable of actually taking control and encouraging people who should know, the masters of industry, to actually listen to what you're talking about, these needs for our future, for children, for other things like that. How do we achieve that and turn it into practice?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll just be honest with you, I don't actually have the answer to that question. I know with my story and my journey, I feel proud of the fact that I've got all of these amazing opportunities to be in the cover of a national magazine, to speak at the press club here today, but there's countless other women, minority women, women with disabilities, women who look visibly different, men as well, who aren't given the same opportunities that I've been given. So I don't know the answer to that question. I know that's what I try to do in my own work, but I don't have a solution. I'm sorry.
Turia, your Women's Weekly cover went viral. I remember when it came out, and I was speaking to Helen McCabe earlier in the week. Do you need more water?
Only my third glass. I'm not nervous at all.
And was she not locked down, she possibly could have gotten here today. But she said two things about that cover. She said that the cover actually, that magazine had a 7% increase on the previous month. So it was a success. In publishing terms, that was a good result. So the other thing she said is that while you've been on other magazine covers, no one else has done that sort of thing. Are you sort of perplexed and disappointed?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's bullshit. It's 2021, and diversity, it's like, oh, we've had a Burns lady on the cover, so we don't really need anyone else with a disability. I don't know the talks and discussions that go on in those meeting rooms, but it feels to me very much like we've ticked that box. We've got this lady who...
But it was 7 years ago.
Well, that's what I mean. That's why I'm annoyed about it, because I've personally been on a lot of covers. I've had an amazing career in the Australian media, and it might sound like I'm whinging about it. I'm not. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had, but it doesn't seem to be spread around to other women as well.
Yeah. Next question is Misha Schubert from the National Press Club.
Turia, Misha Schubert, as a director of the club, thank you for the warmth, wit and wisdom you've shared with us today. To your points about the importance of diversity and representation, I wondered if you had some thoughts on the value of quotas and targets in contexts where organisations or cultures or institutions aren't already sufficiently kind of gaining momentum on their journey.
Yeah, I really think it needs to be a legal requirement, because I think I've actually forgotten which one is the legal one and which one isn't. Is it the quota or the target?
A quota tends to be seen as a harder measure, I gather. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because when you have these goals and ambitions and we hope we can get to 40% women in our workforce, they don't get achieved. So I really think there needs to be harsher penalties to help businesses achieve that. And I really think I'm going crazy up here, finding large corporations, putting a financial cost on not having those diversity measures reached, I think that's the way to do it. Thanks.
Turia, you're getting asked a lot of political questions,
Yeah,
which
it is exhausting. I'm not a politician.
I know. It's not in your ambit to solve all of the country's problems. But on that issue, I'm surprised no one has asked, have you considered politics?
No, because I say what I think, and I know that would get me into trouble.
All right, next question is from Ginger Gorman.
Thank you, Turia. It was amazing hearing you talk, and we laughed a lot as well. I'm Ginger Gorman from Women in Media and editor of Broad Agenda, and my 10-year-old daughter is here today, Elsa, and she's delighted as well. You talked about how women aren't equal in Australia, but things are much worse for women with disabilities, and I've reported on this a lot in terms of domestic violence, sexual abuse, other kinds of violence, employment, all sorts of facets of life. So I wondered if you could just talk to me briefly about that intersectionality and how we can make things better.
Again, I don't know how we can make things better. I know things women in general aren't equal in Australia, but it's worse for women with disabilities. It's worse if you're a migrant woman. It's worse if you're a black woman. It's worse if you're an Aboriginal woman or a Torres Strait Islander woman. I know that. I don't know what we can do or how we can solve that problem.
But is visibility, like going to Emma talking about the cover you were on 7 years ago, visibility must be part of that as well?
I think visibility is part of that, and that's why I'm proud of the work that I've done in the Australian media. But I also think being visible is almost a position of privilege, because I'm lucky I've had all these amazing opportunities, but there's bloody hundreds of thousands of women out there who don't have the same opportunities that I have, who don't have the opportunity to be on the cover of a magazine, who don't have the opportunity of sitting down with a journalist and telling them their stories or speaking at the National Press Club. So I get it. I guess I just try to do what I can do to be visible in this space, but I'm not sure how we can solve the issue or what we can do to help women who aren't as visible.
Thank you.
On that topic of visibility and media, and you did mention that bit of a dick journalist and the sorts of questions he was asking you, you've had a very open and honest relationship with the media ever since your accident. Has that been a two-edged sword? Have you sometimes felt a bit used by it? Has it been exhausting? What have been the highs and lows? And what does the media do well? And what could we learn? What do we not?
I think in general, I have had an amazing relationship with the Australian media. You guys have always treated me so well with a lot of respect, a lot of dignity, like you should treat people in general. So I've had an amazing relationship with the media. There was one incident where I took my baby to a morning show thing, and I had to go to a funeral straight after. That's why my baby was there with me. And I said to the producers before I was going on, my baby's not going on the show. And they said, yeah, that's fine, that's amazing. Once I was on the show, the male host went rogue and was like, where's the baby? Let's bring out the baby, let's get the baby on here. And that put me in a really awkward position. So I was just like, oh, I didn't bring my baby. And then they crossed to a shot of my child being held by another journalist who wasn't on the show at the time. So I felt really pissed off by that. I felt betrayed by that. And on reflection, I should personally have been brave enough to confront them about it and to say that's not appropriate. You do not do that. When a parent says they don't want their child on a television show, you don't put the child on the television show. So I feel like I should have been braver. But also, if someone says they don't want something to happen or they don't feel comfortable with something, you really do have to respect their wishes. So I feel like sometimes journalists can get very hungry for a scoop, hungry for a story, and they're so focused on that general norms, they feel that doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, that's something that Grace Tame mentioned as well, that the media has to be very careful about what it expects when it interviews people.
Yeah, exactly.
For trauma.
Yeah, exactly. Because I have gone through a traumatic experience, and I'm comfortable talking about it and sharing it with all of you guys. But sometimes on days when I feel like shit, I might not want to go there. I might just want to watch Netflix and zone out for a little bit.
Yeah. Our next question is from KPMG.
Hello, Christy Wickett from KPMG. Thank you for your perspective and humour. I think what you've just mentioned there about being brave relates to my more personal question. So as women, we often care a lot about what others think of us.
Yes.
I have a 3-year-old daughter, and given the immense adversity that you've faced, what advice would you give the next generation about navigating other people's opinions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember when I was a kid, I had really bad eczema, and so I used to have to wear these little cotton gloves to school, and I'd be so self-conscious, as you would be if you're at school wearing little white cotton gloves. And my dad, sounds like a bit of a hard ass, but he said, oh, no one's even thinking about you, no one even cares about you, like they're just thinking about themselves. So I try to remember that. I try to remember that people are, as a general rule, very self-absorbed, very self-focused. I'm up here thinking about my speech. You might be sitting there thinking, I wonder if I've washed Johnny's cricket whites for cricket this afternoon, or I've got to go home and defrost the dinner, or, so I think keeping that in mind. And I also think the more you get used to doing something, the more you get used to saying yes to opportunities, the more you hear that doubt and you feel that insecurity and you just say, fuck it. I've just got to live my life. I've got to live my life on my terms, and I will not let other people dictate how I should live my life. So I always do that little kind of pump up before I ever speak. But I think just as well, accepting it and just saying, that you're there, you're always telling me that I can't do things. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a shot.
question from the West Australian.
Hello, I'm Kimberly from the West Australian. Thank you so much for your speech today. You're so inspiring. I guess I just wanted to ask, being through something as traumatic as you have been 10 years ago, have you been able to go back to the Kimberley region, and what would be your advice to people who are trying to overcome a really tough experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did a segment with 60 Minutes years ago with the other survivors from the fire. There's about 6 of us. And 60 Minutes wanted all of us to go back to the scene of the crime, right, to the scene where it happened. And everyone else wanted to revisit that place, but I didn't, and I don't know why I didn't. And I spoke to my partner Michael, and I said, "Do you want to go?" And he was like, "Not really. I don't know what we would get out of revisiting the place." So everyone went back to the site of the fire. Michael and I had a really great day exploring waterholes and having fun. So that's not to say that will be the experience for everyone. And my advice would be to you've just got to look at yourself and think about whether it's going to be beneficial for your journey, whether it's going to be healing for you, because it is for a lot of people. I know it's healing. It was healing for the other survivors. For me, I didn't feel that way about it. I didn't want to go back.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Michelle Ainsworth from Women in Media.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your speech. It was very inspiring, and you do inspire a lot of people through a circumstance that happened in your life. I was just wondering, what inspires you and who inspires you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in the early days of my recovery, I really liked Katie Piper. She's a woman in England who had acid thrown on her face. So I read her books, I read about her story, and I saw her on Instagram, and I was like, this lady's living a kick-ass, awesome life. She looks amazing. So I really looked up to that then. Now that I'm a bit further along in my journey, I probably look to, I guess, maybe other Australians. So, for example, Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame. Like I said, I've personally felt really inspired and motivated by the work that they're doing in their space as well. So that was a really long way of just saying the people that inspire me. So thank you.
So what happens if we get you guys all together, you know, as a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, that would be cool. Let's make that happen.
We'll try.
I'll leave that with you.
We've got another question from Adishala.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the impact of the bushfires on your community on the south coast. We've seen the government pour millions of dollars into a new recovery and resilience agency for natural disasters. I'm curious about what more do you think needs to be done to support the emotional resilience of these communities?
Yeah, you know what? I haven't even thought about that. I feel like most of the people in my community on the surface seem to be coping with it fine, because a lot of people didn't lose their homes, they didn't lose their farms and things like that. I really think that, you know, there's been so much focus on the physical recovery and back burning and cultural burning and preventing all of that from happening again, but there hasn't really been a focus on the emotional recovery, and I haven't even thought about that either. So like I don't have a solution to that. I am sounding like a politician, just...
We'll get you there. Another question from AAP.
Thank you so much. Georgie Moore from AAP again. You've spoken about the extraordinary public opportunities you've had, but you also say you haven't seen them extended to other women who say aren't privileged, who aren't Caucasian, or who aren't able-bodied. Why do you think we're still stuck in such box-ticking tokenism and kind of inspiration porn when it's 2021?
Yeah, I don't know, and I've asked myself that very same question numerous times. I don't know why, you know, there's a business case of having someone who looks like me on the cover of Australian Women's Weekly. It sold 7% more copies than any other magazine that year. So there's obviously a real business case and an economic case for it to happen. So I don't know why the media or the people in those rooms aren't listening to that, looking at the figures and saying, oh wow, Turia's cover did the best. Like, why don't we have a black woman on the cover? Why don't we have an older woman on the cover? Why don't we have a disabled woman on the cover? I don't know.
And leading on from that, you do all these events and you speak about your life and your story to kind of further that narrative and to show people that, you know, what you can overcome and that everyone doesn't look the same way or come from the same background. But is it a double-edged sword? Do you sometimes feel like you're feeding the inspiration porn sharks in trying to overcome that?
Yeah, probably. And I think there's always going to be people who look at me and go, oh, that poor burns victim, isn't she inspiring? Just the fact that she manages to get out of bed in the morning, it's amazing. So, of course, there's always going to be those people who see me as inspiration porn, just like there's always going to be people who think things about you that you might not necessarily like. So I get it. And I have always tried to intentionally inspire people with the things that I've done and make them want to do more, or want to be braver, or want to express their vulnerability, or feel braver to share their stories. So that's what I hope that happens. And if there's a few people who wank off over me as well, then that's fine.
Hopefully not. Thank you.
On the issue of inspirational porn, what is your relationship with social media? Because you have amassed a huge following.
Yeah.
And yet, when everyone's in lockdown and scrolling Instagram endlessly and seeing filtered, best version images, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, look, it's people's Instagram profiles, so they're entitled to put whatever they want on them. I don't use filters. I try and show photos of me looking really cool at the National Press Club, but also looking like shit after 2 hours sleep after feeding a newborn. So I try to do both. I think it is a double-edged sword in a sense, but I'm personally really grateful for social media because it's allowed me to build a business. It's allowed me to have this direct relationship with people. It's helped to inform a lot of my business decisions as well.
Would you encourage people to just be a little bit more honest on social media?
Yes, I think that would be awesome if people could be more honest on social media. I don't know why more people aren't.
And to those magazine editors, because ultimately it's those guys who decide. Not everyone's Helen McCabe. What would you say to them about actually putting their money where their mouth is and doing the legwork and finding a more diverse cover girl for their next edition?
Well, set themselves a target. Say for this year we're going to have 4 women who are diverse, whether they're Black, Indigenous, disabled, older, whatever it is, we're going to have 4 women who are diverse. Then the next year go, okay, let's have half of our cover girls being diverse. I think that's what they could do.
Hope they're listening. Another question from Lani.
Hello, me again. So one of the things that Liz Broderick, the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, talks about is the importance of having male allies in the push for equality.
Yeah.
So in raising your 2 sons, what do you think about and what do you hope to teach them in relation to growing up in a world where women should be equal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, they're 3 and 1, so the extent of their awareness of the world is very limited. And to be honest, if I get to the day and they're still alive, I'm like, cool, job done. As they're older, I'll probably have more of those conversations with them. But at this stage, I hope just by leading and just by leading by example, they'll pick up hopefully some of what I'm trying to teach.
We're nearly at the end, Turia. One, maybe 2 more questions, but Nick.
You've led by example just in this speech today. How is it that we ordinary people can get in touch with that the essence that you're just displaying all the time? How do we find that? What empowers us to actually say the right thing the way you are today, and to understand what really is important about life?
Yeah, I think, you've got to be fair to yourself. This is my job, so obviously I'm going to be better at it than a lot of people in this room. That's just an objective fact. And the second thing I would say is I really believe it's all well and good to have awesome goals and be self-motivated and have these things that you're trying to achieve. But I think for myself, I always remind myself to take a step back from that, because for me, in my life, my most important thing, the thing I treasure the most, is my relationships. The relationships with my kids, the relationship with my partner Michael, with my family and with my friends. That's the thing that hopefully people can take away.
The right answer.
We're going to let Press Club CEO Morris have the final question.
I had a really good political question, but it's just a waste of time, so I'm not going to do that. I think I'd just like you to cover off the ends of the story. Did you walk across the coals?
Yes, I did.
How did you manage the Cockroach Crisis? What happened there? And what was the other one you did? Those two stories will do.
With the cockroaches, I just pretended that they weren't there. And then the hair and makeup artist and the stylist were like looking around, looking at me, and I was like, so great to meet you, welcome to my home. Like, come on in, it's so great to have you here. So I just literally pretended I couldn't see them.
Well, it's a great privilege having you here today, and we're all very honoured.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.